Hello, everyone. This is Eric Anderson, host of the YXE Underground podcast, and it is a Sunday afternoon. What's the date, you guys? March 29th. And I'm with two of my favorite people in the whole wide world, and I'm very excited to talk with them because there is a very, very interesting documentary that's going to be released to the world on April 2nd at the Broadway Theatre at 7 o'clock, and hopefully I will see you all there. It's called How Chee, and the documentary filmmaker and the amazing artist who designed the poster are sitting across from me right now at the Yard and Flagon Pub. Would you care to introduce yourselves, gentlemen?
My name is Craig Silliphant, writer and director of How Chee.
And I'm Don Sparrow, illustrator of the poster for How Chee.
Craig, for someone who has no idea what this is about, can you explain a little bit How Chee is about and the original television ad?
Yeah, so in 1996, there was a commercial made, a low-budget, 90s, production values for television, commercial for the Great Buffet of China. And in the commercial is a older white pitchman and then a table full of young white people. And the pitchman explains at the beginning that How Chee is Chinese for, wow, what delicious food. And then throughout the commercial, all these white people keep saying, How Chee for me, they're eating the food and whatnot. So that commercial started airing in 1996, and it ran until 1998. But the interesting part of it is that it's in the advertising world what we call heavy rotation. It's like it ran, 20, 30 times a day, 100 times a week. So anytime, I was going to university and working at a video store at that time, and anytime I came home in between those things and turned on the TV, you were guaranteed to see it many times. And because the commercial was so cringeworthy, and because we were beat about the face and neck with it for so long, it sort of became this piece of Saskatoon folklore. Everybody hated it at the time, or you sort of laughed at it, but you also kind of hated it. It sort of drove us nuts, and so this had unintended consequences for the people that were in the commercial, as the documentary explains.
There's so much to pull from there, and I will ask you questions about that. But Donnie, do you remember watching the ad as a kid?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm similar age to Craig. I think we're maybe a year apart, but same thing, that late night, low budge ads. I remember it as being a late night ad, but I think it was kind of around the clock.
All the time.
But late night, it was a heavy rotation, as were a lot of other, Chinese food restaurants so it really captured the imagination of kind of the sarcastic college kid, because it was so distinctive and memorable, and also we went to that restaurant all the time. It was Cheap Eats. It was a great, Saskatoon landmark that way too.
Yeah, because I remember growing up in Swift Current, I never saw, we had CTV, but we also had, it was kind of different in our CTV was from Regina, but then we also had a local Swift Current station called CJFB, and Craig, you should do a documentary about that station someday. It was very interesting. But so we saw, not this ad, but I remember the ad, seeing the same ones over and over again. But I remember coming up to Saskatoon for volleyball trips, and we would eat at the restaurant. So I remember the food, but I don't remember the ad. But so when you say you guys would see it all the time, day and night, it was just on all the time.
It was on constantly for 2 years. Like I said, I would go to university in the day, come home, turn on the TV, I'd see it a bunch of times, then I'd go to Rogers Video from 4 to midnight and work a shift, and then come home at midnight and turn on the TV before I went to bed or whatever, and you'd see it again probably 4 times in an hour. It would just be in every commercial break all the time.
Yeah, I can vouch. It was every, and particularly late at night. It was where I think there were fewer ads, and they went very local. It would be the first ad out almost every break. Yeah.
Were they just paying all the money then to CTV to get it that heavy rotation?
I would assume so, yeah. I mean, it's you never know. Sometimes as Donnie maybe was sort of alluding to there, in overnights, sometimes you get extra inventory, just spiffed to you by the station or whatever. So, and I'm not 100% sure, but it actually was produced by Global Television. So, but it may have aired on CTV and Global, because there was a lot of trading of, there was, you mentioned there was Toon's Kitchen, Ming's, is it Kitchen?
Yeah, Ming's.
Yeah, like so there was it was not the only sort of low budget Chinese food commercial that was airing ad nauseum at that time, but it definitely was the most memorable one.
And that's an assumption on my part. Like I just assumed it was on CTV because there is a CTV personality in the ad, right? Is Jeff
Kitchen? That's the Tunes Kitchen one. Yeah, but we were talking about that before, where there's another another memorable ad where Tunes Kitchen was bragging that they had their own delivery car, so that even if you'd ordered from the other guys, it was order from us and we'll bring it to you sooner. Cancel your order, and that was a Rogstad ad. But yeah, I do associate it with that CTV. Television block late at night.
Yeah, Jim McCrory was in one of them. Jeff Rogstad was in another one. Yeah.
This is, as someone who didn't grow up in Saskatoon at that time, this is just so fascinating. So then, Craig, where did the idea to do a documentary about this ad come from?
So a couple of years ago now, I was at work at the radio station there where I work, and one of the writers that works for me called me over, and she saw this article online. And she was like, it was an article about that Chee commercial. And she was like, hey, do you remember this commercial? So this writer named Jesse Pottinger, he's a Vancouver writer, but he was living in China for a number of years. And he stumbled across this commercial in China. And Chinese people, it went viral in China. Like they put it in, they have an app called WeChat that they use that's sort of like WhatsApp or Facebook. And so they send, stickers, reaction stickers to each other with the Chee people in them. So he thought this was so hilarious, and it shows up on a lot of social media in China and even in North America. But he went back to Vancouver eventually and decided it would be a fun idea to do a travel story and write an article about this commercial. And so he actually had some flight points and flew to Saskatoon and checked out the great buffet and wrote this article. Now the article was a little bit like in the 90s we just hated this commercial because it was just so annoying. But now it was a little more like cultural appropriation claims and things like that, because, as I said, it was like a bunch of white people sort of mangling this Chinese phrase, which is not Chee, it's more like Sheer. And so I took it home to my wife, that article, to see. She's like 4 years younger than me, and so sometimes you'd think we would have all the same pop culture touch points, but we don't always. Sometimes she just doesn't remember something that I think she would. So I showed her the commercial to be like, hey, do you remember this commercial? And at the end of the commercial, the last Chee girl pops up and says Chee, and my wife was like, oh my God, that's Lara. And I was like, oh, you're right. It was a friend of hers who she works with, and I just never put, I'd met Lara before, but I never put two and two together because it'd probably been 28 years or something since I'd seen the commercial before that. And so we texted Lara, and when we texted her, she reacted like she was in the witness protection program and we had found her. This thing, she did not have a good experience with this thing at all. So anyway, that was sort of the genesis of it. At that point, my wife was like, you have to tell this story. And she is very supportive of everything I do, but she honestly doesn't really care what I'm doing. So the fact that she was like...
I'm sure she cares a bit, Craig.
Maybe a little bit, but the fact that she was like, you got to tell this story, I was like, okay, you're right. This is a great Saskatoon story, and it should be told.
So you why a documentary then? Because you are a gifted storyteller. We're actually sitting at a table at the Yard and Flagon where if I turn to my right, I see Bunny Hug Cynic, your latest book. You're an author, you're an amazing writer, but why a film documentary for this?
Well, that's a good question. So I was sort of working on a podcast idea around that time, but I thought the fact that it's so visual because you actually have the commercial, I was like, it probably should be video. So I have worked in the film industry in the last 30 years in the province. And written a lot of stuff. I consult on a lot of things these days, but I had never actually directed a project myself on this scale. And so I thought, I want to just try this to do it, to get into it, and just make mistakes even, and have this the documentary itself has this aesthetic of being this. It's a zero budget DIY, almost like there was a film movement in Europe a number of years ago called Dogma 95, and they had a bunch of rules that they had to all follow to make these films. And I didn't follow the Dogma 95 rules, but that idea of, one of my favorite sayings is limitation breeds creativity. So if I could limit myself by having no budget and all of this stuff and just try to tell this story, I just thought that would be a great experiment to learn things. And I did learn a ton making it. I made so many mistakes.
So I'm so curious then. So how do you, what were some of the first things you did to get this story? Like, I would assume you had to find some of the people in the ad. Would that be a fair assumption?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously we had an in with Lara.
Right.
Now, she is not comfortable with any of this and how it keeps coming up and stuff, but her father, Michael Murphy, he was the pitchman. So this is what I learned in this commercial. All these people were related. I didn't know that 30 years ago. I don't know, Donnie, if you knew that 30 years ago.
No, I thought it was just
A bunch of like local actors or whatever, right?
yeah, extras.
Yeah. So no, they all the three people at the table are siblings, and the pitchman at the start is their dad, and he was a prof at the U of S, an education prof at the U of S at the time. So, you know, knowing Lara, we were able to sort of get hooked up with her dad and her brother as well, and they like are tickled pink every time this thing comes up. They think it's super funny. They even the article that didn't necessarily show it in the best light, like they love the attention for it, and just, you know, they just love the whole thing. Like, it's just a really funny, fun thing for them. So, so they were like all in to be interviewed pretty quickly. And then, you know, from there, you know, I got a hold of the Great Buffet of China too, and interviewed Andy Kwan, who is the owner of Kwan's Cuisine back in the 90s on Central Avenue, and then Great Buffet of China in, I think, 95, he bought it, and then they made that commercial. So, and then his son Justin co-owns it and runs it with him, so I interviewed those guys too. And then I interviewed Jesse Pottinger, like I got a hold of that guy, and then a few other people to sort of provide opinion and color throughout. So,
and was it, like, at any point were the people that you were interviewing, like, were they uncomfortable at all talking about this, or were they eager to talk about it?
Everybody was fairly eager except for Lara, and in fact her sister Kathleen, who's also in the commercial, declined to participate. She actually lives in Ontario, and I think some of these people, and this kind of comes up in the documentary too, feel that, like, if suddenly it gets out that they were in this commercial, it could affect their career and stuff because of the sort of poor light that it's been looked at, you know, in the last couple of years. So, but Lara only did it because her dad, Michael, he was 90 at the time I interviewed him, which was in 2024, like when we did his original interview. He was 90 years old, but he also had cancer and some other issues that of a 90-year-old variety, and so she only agreed to do it really because he was so, like, excited about it, and it really was this telling of this family story that they have, you know, being told definitively. And they didn't get a chance to tell their side when Jesse wrote his article, and they wanted to, and it just wasn't part of it. So I think they were, you know, happy that somebody like me came along to be able to have them tell that story and sort of explain all these things that some people might be giving side eye to these days, you know.
Donnie, like, when this article came out a few years ago, that sort of prompted this, like, did you read the article, or did you, like, was it on your radar? Because I think of, like, both of you are so in touch with all things pop culture, but especially, like, what's happening in Saskatoon. But was that on your radar at all?
No, I didn't know. I mean, I heard from Craig about the article, sort of as talking about this film. But growing up at the same time as Craig, kind of separately, it was just this kind of historical piece. The same way, you know, everybody has, you know, the Audio Warehouse radio ads. There's these radio ads there, or these different ads through time that kind of linger and hang on, and that was definitely one of them, the How Chee one. So I was so excited when I heard that Craig was doing this project. First of all, that the story would be told, but also that it would be told well. I know Craig's work. I'm just glad it's being told and being told by somebody that I kind of trust it with, because I had a lot of affection for that ad and these pieces of kind of Saskatoon, you know, memorabilia but no, the article I was not aware of.
Craig, I'm curious too, like, and I want people to see the documentary, so I don't want you to give, like, everything away, but, like, whose idea for the ad was this? Like, was it the restaurant's idea, or like where did this come from? No,
it actually, the How Chee ad was not the first ad. So originally, Andy Kwan owned a restaurant on 20th Street called Hai Ping. In 1981, he opened that. Then a few years later, he moved to Central Avenue and opened up, I think it was at the time, it was called like Central Avenue Chinese food or something, and Michael Murphy actually named it Kwan's Cuisine because he thought it would be alliterative. You know, they were kind of buddies or whatever, and Michael followed him, you know, when he moved to Central. And then, but Kwan's, when it opened, was like not doing well. It was dead, and they were sinking. So, you know, they realized that, you know, that the place was empty all the time when they went there. And it was actually Michael's son, Chris Murphy, we call him Murphy, who was, I think, about 15 or something at the time, and he had this idea. Hey, Dad, wouldn't it be funny if, like, you had a bunch of white people talking about, like, Chinese dishes, and they thought that was kind of a good idea, and so they kind of called Andy over and convinced him, to do it, and then they made that commercial too, and that turned the fortunes for Kwan's Cuisine around. So it, like, kind of saved the business. So then a few years later, when it was time to make when he bought the Great Buffet of China location, they were like, oh, we need a new commercial to get the word out that this place is here. So they just brought the team back together, and I think Murphy was living in Vancouver, going to school at the time, but he wrote the script at that point. So.
Oh my gosh! So this all got started from the mind of a 15-year-old.
Basically, yeah.
Wow, this is amazing, and yet viewed through the lens today, and I can understand why some people might want to distance themselves from it. Like, how does cultural appropriation come up in the documentary?
Well, we definitely look at we look at, like. Again, I don't want to give away too much, I guess, but we look at especially, like, Asian representation in media through everything, like, Martin Yan had a show called Yan Can Cook, and there was another show that he had, Walk with Yan, that's what it was. And so, or even, like, 16 Candles, you've got, like, Long Duck Dong in that movie, or Mickey Rooney in Breakfast at Tiffany's, So we talk about that kind of idea, and then the idea of, like, is it, that the fact that they mangled this word, the pronunciation and the spelling of it, like, does that matter? Does it, like, and so it's not, the documentary sort of presents these questions, and some people in the documentary give their opinions of it, but, that's sort of how it's expressed.
As a filmmaker, is it hard to remain objective, or do you, like, because I do you want to inject your thoughts into it as well? Like, how do you find that balance?
Yeah, so I think it depends on what I'm working on in general. Sometimes it might be like, no, I don't. I just want to present it, and everybody can make their own decision. In this case, I definitely had a bit of a opinion about it, basically, and so I let those conversations happen, though, to explore it. It doesn't mean I have to agree with it for it to be explored. But I do sort of give my 2 cents as well by the end of the movie, and settle that, and somebody can agree or disagree with me if they want.
Yeah. You said you learned lots of things by making this. What were some of the things you learned?
Well, probably the biggest thing I learned was like the very first day of shooting, when we had we interviewed Murphy and his dad Michael on the same day, and in lots of those, like, documentaries, you see the interview, but then you see a lot of footage of, like, kind of behind the scenes, and some of the real stuff happens when they're not in the middle of the interview, right? Like, and we made a huge mistake. We were setting up for the shoot, and when they came in, and not filming them. So Michael walked in, though, and this guy was a real character, like, in a big way. He came in a hat and dark sunglasses and a big fur coat, and walked in and said, "All right, Craig, I'm ready for my close-up." And I was like, that would have been just the most amazing introduction to him in the movie, which, of course, we weren't shooting, so we didn't have. So, you'll see later characters that get introduced that have better introductions in that way, because we learned that at that point. So, and stuff like that, or even, like, I used a variety of editing software over time for different things, Photoshop, audio, like Pro Tools, things like that. But I'd never used Adobe Premiere Pro, which is what I edited the documentary on. So I edited, like, I don't want to learn Premiere Pro, I just want to edit a documentary. But I had to do one to do the other, really. So, things like that, like learning software, learning, how to organize and plan things properly so that they go off well. There's another scene in the movie where we had a person standing on a mark, waiting for something, and they got excited and left their mark. So, like, all the cameras were, like, pointed at something specific, and everybody kind of had to scramble to follow the guy. Things like that, where you're like, we should be more loose in how we're shooting certain things.
Okay. And when you say we, like, how many people were you working with?
I think there was a crew of. There was 3 of us that were there pretty much every time. me, a young guy that I work with at the radio station, Ethan Duscher. He also went to Reyes in the film program. So, and then another guy, Reed Geisler, who was also in that film program with Ethan. So those were sort of the three of us. And then there was other people like Hank Cruz from Punch that I worked with, and Jody Cason was on a shoot or two. A number of other people would come out and help do certain things or whatever. But it was sort of that core group of the three of us that were at every shoot.
So cool. And then at what point did you bring in the gentleman to your left?
So, I am a big fan of Donnie's work. I think he's a brilliant illustrator. And when I knew it was time for a poster, I was playing with things in Photoshop or whatever. I had some ideas and stuff like that. But you mentioned Bunny Hug Cynic, which is on the wall beside us here. I designed that cover, but I worked with a designer that's a good friend of mine, and so I knew, I had lots of things designed, album covers and book covers and stuff that I didn't like, and so I was like, I need to take control of this when I did Bunny Hug Cynic, to go, even if everybody else hates it, as long as I love it, and I knew I needed to do the same with the How Chee poster. So I had this idea of a poster that was. There's an artist who passed away recently named Drew Struzan, and he's like an iconic movie poster artist, painter really, right? And so he did, the posters for Raiders of the Lost Ark, Star Wars, like, those painted where the characters are on there. And I wanted that kind of idea of the characters writ large on the paper, and I knew that Donnie would be able to like capture that. So I kind of called Donnie and told him what I was looking for and gave him those touch points, and obviously he knows more about this stuff than me, so he took it and ran with it.
Donnie, the fact that you were familiar with the ad too, and you had this connection to it, like, and the late night TV connection to it, did that help in making the poster?
Oh, it really did. I was kind of jumping out of my shoes to get to work on it, and I think he chatted with me about it, before I was involved professionally. But so I was very excited that it would happen. But then to sort of be even a small part of it, I was just really excited that it's to be a part of it, because I really wanted this documentary to happen. But yeah, the Drew Struzan connection was, we both are big fans of his, and that was a really good note, because there's a certain lighting that Drew Struzan does in his. It's sort of a golden glow kind of rim lighting often, and then and like you say, with the giant characters and then some backdrop, and so I really wanted to capture that. And with it being How Chee and being familiar with the ad, my mind immediately went to Big Trouble in Little China, which is another Drew Struzan poster. So that was, as there's certain elements in this. It's not a out-and-out parody, but having the large people, the large figures, and then the terrain underneath in kind of an ornamental frame. That's about as far as I took the kind of homage to that. I guess the How Chee font, which I didn't know if he'd use or not, I designed my own sort of hand-done How Chee font that sort of looks like the word trouble from Big Trouble in Little China, and though with kind of a more Saskatoon coloring. But the tricky part was these, there's deterioration, and these are old ads, and we only have the YouTube clips of them in large. So that was my reference, was sort of like, well, what do these people look like? Because I'm stilling a copy of a copy of a copy, and hoping, but drawing it as sharply as I can, and hoping that I'm getting the likenesses down, and hopefully, the family, when they see it, they'll recognize themselves. But I think as people, I've been getting, as the posters gone up and stuff, I've been getting reaction. I hope Craig's been getting reaction, and I think people know right away, just from the body language, just from the poses that are from the freeze frames of the actual ad, that they're like, oh, I know that, I know this, this commercial. So
gosh, I hadn't thought of that too, in terms of like, you're having to draw from a copy of a copy of a copy. Like, it's not like the TV stations, they wouldn't have the original, would they? No,
I was not, nobody could find any of that stuff. I think they threw out all that stuff years ago, because the woman that I mentioned who showed me the commercial, the article from Vancouver that works with me, she worked at Global for years and years, and her husband worked at Global at the time too. He actually shot the commercial, and was another guy that didn't want to appear in the documentary because he works at the university now, so he thought he didn't want to be associated with the commercial. But yeah, I think we're going to turn that around with this movie. I think I'm reclaiming this piece of Saskatoon history.
So that's so interesting, though, Craig. Too. Is that, when you started this, was that a goal of yours, or is that something where, I feel like this has been a really cool and interesting, and not only did you learn lots of things on the technical side of things, but has this been quite the journey for you making this?
100%, yeah, for sure. I mean, I was also trying to finish it on a timeline. I work on one big project at a time. I learned years ago that if you do more than that, like nothing moves forward because you're always picking at 2 things or 3 things or whatever. So I was working on Bunny Hug Cynic when I started shooting interviews for Chee, but I started shooting it, like I said, because my wife told me I had to, but also because Michael was 90 years old at that point. So I was like, we've got to shoot him. And it actually, like, I was told that it gave him a new lease on life, really. Like, he was down and sort of planning to pass away that year, but he stuck around for another couple of years after that. So I sent him some footage here and there so he could see certain things, but unfortunately he passed away before the final cut. And the idea that was I had to push out Bunny Hug Cynic and then like pivot back to Chee. So, but yeah, so it's been a 2-year. I actually watched a screening at home last night with a friend of mine that is going to Italy, so he can't come to the screening, and I wanted his thoughts because he's a filmmaker too. And it was like just weird to hear them talk about like what year it was. You know, they're like, well, in 2024, nobody should be saying this kind of stuff, and you know, it's 2026 now, so it's like it's been 2 years of working on this. So.
This might be maybe a too inside baseball question, but I am interested. As someone like with this podcast, I work really hard to make my guests feel comfortable, so that they feel comfortable sharing their stories and their passions into a microphone. There was one summer I worked at CBC where I was a TV reporter, and I wasn't very good at it, and I don't think I did a good enough job, because I think when you put a camera in front of someone, like there's a whole other extra layer of like, oh gosh, like there's a camera in front of me. Everything I say, it's on camera. And you're talking about a subject that clearly makes some people uncomfortable. So, Craig, how did you make people feel comfortable? Were they were free to express whatever was on their minds in regards to how did you do that?
Well, hopefully I did. I mean, I don't know that I did, but I think like as you know, I work in broadcasting and in radio and stuff. So it's, I'm often called to help someone with a performance in a vocal booth or something like that, where it's, it's all about like, don't worry. People freeze up as soon as they see a microphone or a camera, like you're saying, and it's more just about like, hey, don't worry, we can say something again, we can reshoot it, we can do whatever if we need to, but. Especially for, Lara was a big one, right? Because she was not comfortable doing any of this. She wasn't comfortable making the commercial. She wasn't comfortable with the fallout of the commercial, and she wasn't really comfortable being interviewed. So we did that one in my house. And so, I brought her into my home and sat her in a nice, comfortable chair. And, that small crew too, they were nice guys. So it was, it was not a bunch of, it wasn't 30 people sort of crowded around. It was just the 3 of us doing it. And, I think even making her feel comfortable with my opinion of the commercial and everything, and how it like helped that Kwan family like find that success. Like, I sort of reframed it for her as I was interviewing her a little bit. So like you'll see that in the documentary. She kind of talks about that as we're like, you can see the wheels turning while she's talking. So, but yeah, I think it's just. Yeah, make them feel comfortable, basically.
Yeah, there's so many more questions I want to ask about like specific characters and stuff, but then I keep reminding myself, no, like watch the documentary. You're gonna go see. Donnie, what are you most curious in terms of actually watching the documentary? What are you most curious about?
I wonder how, and I think from the little I've seen of it, I think there is this element, but how it is. You mentioned how your wife had a different relationship to it than you did, even with those 4 years. I do feel like the reaction this ad gets is generational. So I do kind of wonder. That's what I'm very curious about, if that bears out to be true, where it's the objection to it is maybe people who came up later, who have a different understanding of media and a different understanding of those, of representation, of that, we had to grow up with, is bad representation better than no representation, or these different things. And also, we have a lot of, I think I do anyway, have a lot of affection for this ad, maybe because I I loved the restaurant, and I loved Kwan's Cuisine. That was it. That was like our dining out place. As kids growing up, it was like, oh, fancy event, Kwan's Cuisine. So I have a lot of affection for just Chinese food in our city. So that I'm very curious about, to see the different generations' reactions and maybe even learn from them. Right? I mean, I have my own emotions about it, but to see it from a different perspective, I think will be very beneficial.
The night of the screening, are because I'm going to be there, and it's going to be so neat to see, like you said, Don, like different generations and their reactions. As like, Craig, how are you feeling as we're a few days away from the actual screening, and the fact too that we're going to be in a movie theater, and then there's going to be a Q&A afterwards and whatever. But how are you feeling about everything?
I'm feeling good. I mean, there's always a bit of like trepidation, I guess. I don't think I would say I'm nervous, but there's always trepidation. I think especially for me, especially the Murphy and the Kwan families have been waiting 2 years for me to like finish this now, right? And so there's a lot of Murphys as well. Like there's 3 siblings in Saskatoon that Michael, Michael's children, and then they all have like a bunch of kids too. So it's like. There's going to be like the first, couple of rows of the theater. There's like 20 or 30 like Murphys alone. So if I want them to like it. I want them to do justice, even if there might be parts that make them uncomfortable because it is questioning some of those things. Yeah. But and for them too. Michael passed away in December. 2025. So it's still pretty fresh, I think, for them. And this story is really like an encapsulation of a lot of things for them and their family. So that's the stuff that I'm really like. I want everybody else to like it too.
Yeah. And they're gonna see their dad on the big screen.
Totally. Totally. Well, and we're doing a Q&A after. Jeff Frogstad's going to moderate, and it'll be me and Murphy. Okay. And so I even warned him beforehand, like. Are you sure you're okay doing this? Because it might be emotional to see all this stuff and then have to get up on stage like directly after and answer, questions and stuff like that. So, but yeah, it's good. I was starting to, get a little nervous as to how it was going to look on a big screen. Like you edit it on a very small screen, and then I would export it and put it on one of the big TVs in my house, and I would notice things that like you did not notice on the small screen, and so. I was like, is this like the sound and the visuals, like, will the resolution be okay? So I took it to the Broadway the other day, and we just Regan, the projectionist there, great guy. He threw it on for me, and we just watched a few minutes of it. And at that point, I was like, oh man, this is. Like then it became kind of real, you know what I mean? And I was like, this is amazing. And then you always worry about ticket sales and stuff like that too, but it's selling really well right now. And Saskatoon's such a last-minute city.
Saskatoon is a last-minute city. We're all smiling right now, yeah.
Yeah. So, I think we've sold enough tickets at this point, a couple of hundred, that I'd be. Like, I'm going to be happy no matter what with the turnout, but it'll be interesting to see if we fill the place or even 300 people or whatever it is. So that stuff I was a little bit worried about at first too, but it's and great at the Broadway too. When I was there the other day, they made me feel great about it. They were like, no, the problem is going to be getting all those people in and seated by 7. They were like, it'll start late because once they get through the box office and the concession, it's like
Yes. Yeah, you need your popcorn. I appreciate you also sharing the how personal this is, and like the you want to do everyone in the document, you want to do them justice, and I think that's really not a question there, but I just think that's really admirable of you. So
well, it's funny because I got an email from Justin Kwan the other day, and I think some people had started asking him some questions based on some press material they saw, and like there was a bit of discomfort there about like. Sort of the implication that the Great Buffet of China had not been doing well, and that this commercial turned it around, which isn't the story. It was the early days of Kwan's, and Michael was actually a baby. Justin was a baby at that point. So I was like, oh no, are we going to have a problem here? Like, but we talked about it, and I kind of explained, what he was going to see in the movie, and that it was just, somebody had sort of misinterpreted some of the press materials. So, but very much so. Like I was like, I do not want, I don't want any of these families to feel bad about this. I want them to, think it's a great representation of their families, and in the case of the Kwans, their business, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, this is awesome, you guys. I like I said off the top, you're two of my favorite people. I love your immense creativity. I love that. And then not only do you have amazing ideas, but then you actually do it. Like it's one thing to, I often have ideas and then nothing ever happens, but I think it's so great that you guys have done this, and I can't wait to see the film. I'm looking at the poster right now. Are you happy with it? Like now, like when you see an actual physical copy, you happy?
Oh, I'm thrilled. No, I'm so excited, like I said, to be a part of it and to see it on the Broadway Theatre marquee. That's only happened a couple times in my life, and it's pretty exciting. And next to Fight Club or these different real deal movies, and it's a real deal movie, and I got to be a small part of it. I'm looking at it and I notice I do remember a moment where I was working on it where talking about that resolution issue again, where I couldn't tell what color Michael's eyes were, and so I had to text Craig and go, hey, would you mind? And then he did the footage, did a screenshot, and was like, I think they look blue to me. So I'm like, okay, blue it is, But these kind of things where I'm sure that Drew Struzan didn't have to deal with, because he had Spielberg money behind him or something. But yeah, I'm really happy with how it turned out, and just really happy for Craig. Happy that it's getting made and that it's such a local. There's so much local about it, and the story of local restaurants, and that it's at the Broadway is so fitting. And I mean, I think it's going to have legs, and I think that it's a universal enough story of sort of late night TV and ads and whatever that I think it definitely could have legs beyond Saskatoon. But I just love that it is so Saskatoon.
Yeah. Thanks you guys so much. Oh, I guess before I go, Craig, where details? Thursday night, what's happening?
Thursday night, Broadway Theatre, 7 p.m. You can buy tickets at broadwaytheatre.ca, or you can be one of those last-minute people that walks up and tries to get one. And then the film itself is about 50 minutes. Don said it's a real deal movie. It's a crappy YouTube video that should have been 10 minutes long and instead is 50 minutes.
Don't say that. Don't say that. It's going to be awesome.
So the 50-minute film, and then after that, like I said, a Q&A with probably just me and Murphy, but if anybody else, if there's other members I think the other members of the family will be there but aren't interested in getting up on the stage, so and then Rogstad will host that, and we'll just go from there and see what happens. And there's some door prizes and stuff too. My friend Jody sourced out 400 fortune cookies and put Don's art on them, and like a number on each one. She numbered 400 fortune cookies to give away this door prize that she came up with. So,
Jody,
yeah.
she's
well,
wonderful.
That's the great. You said this. It's like that's the cool thing about this community is I can go, hey, I'm going to do something like this, and then I'm like, I need a poster. I'm going to call Don Sparrow, and I need some promotional materials, and I didn't even call Jody. She just showed up with 400. But there's a community around this, and people like yourself that are like, hey, I'm going to come and record you guys at the Yard and get the word out.
Yes.
I love that about Saskatoon, and that a project like this can exist. Even the Broadway, I actually originally was going to rent the theater out and take on the risk. And as soon as I told Lenore Meyer, the executive director of the Broadway, about it, she was like, no, we want to do this with you. Let's co-present it together. So they take on the risk, and then we share the profits or whatever. So the fact that there's that, and she said thank you for making weird art about Saskatoon, and I would say thank you to them for for screening some weird art I made, So it's great that we have a community that can do that kind of thing.
It is, yeah. Lots of gratitude. I love it. Thanks you guys so much, and best of luck with the screening on Thursday.
Thank you, Eric.
Thanks for having me.